I'm going to start with Morris because it's conveniently positioned here. So I did get some miles on this car this week. I've been talking about sort of getting the first long drives done in it, and went generally very well. I did about a 70-mile drive. I basically decided to try and kill two birds with one stone. The client who we built the Kaiser Mercedes for is back to take it out for a journey, I think next week possibly. So I thought I wouldn't mind getting that in for a bit of a check-up, getting some miles on it. So I thought what I'll do is I'll take this up to the place where that's stored, leave this there, bring Kaiser back, give that a check over the following day, run that back and bring this back, which consequently meant this had about a 70-mile drive up there. Which went incredibly well. Absolutely loved every minute of it. I would say the only comment I had, which I'd already got at the back of my mind, is I think I'm going to soften it up slightly, because at the moment, in a bid to soften the ride, I've softened the dampers right down, but I think all that's highlighting now is the fact that it's you feel the bounce of the springs a lot more, and it's more readily on the bump stops. So what I think I'm going to do is the opposite now: soften the springs up, stiffen the dampers back up to control the springs. And I think that should sort the ride out really well. Really well. I mean, it's actually spot on country lanes when you really want to give it some beans. You have to excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough. But yeah, on a long run, on some of the sort of faster roads, like there's a concrete road on the journey I did with kind of joins in it, and it was a bit dung 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 over the joins. But other than that, absolutely loved it. Was faultless on the journey there, and then 2 days later, went to do the journey back. I think I got about 40 miles in, and then the diff suddenly got a lot noisier on it, and I made the decision to pull over and get it recovered, because the last thing I want is the diff to actually lock up and lock the rear wheels up while I'm driving along. So we haven't had a chance to investigate that yet. I suspect it'll be something to do with the crown wheel and pinion, because we reluctantly used an aftermarket crown wheel and pinion on it because we couldn't get a brand new Mazda one. Whether that's the cause or not, I don't know. It seems odd that it suddenly did it. It's almost more like a bearing either collapsed or went out of adjustment. So I was distracted there by Kelly just peering through the door. But yes, either way, we'll strip it out and have a look. I've got a feeling the end result is essentially going to be fitting a genuine Mazda crown wheel and pinion, but perhaps a good used one. But yeah, we'll strip that out. But yes, other than that, really, really happy still with the car. Drives just, I could never get over how well it drives down the lanes. Oh, thank you, Nat. I am going to start with the Morris. So obviously last week was differential noise misery. We've now dropped the diff out, and sure enough, exactly as suspected, the aftermarket crown wheel and pinion appear to be made of cheese, because it's just probably more worn than I've ever seen a crown wheel, I think. Apart from the one in my Subaru Forester, which was in 1,000 pieces. Yeah, considering I've literally done like 150 to 200 miles in the car, it's horrendously worn. And it was definitely set up correctly. I know it was, I've got photos of the paint marking on it, and Nat and Jim both checked it together. So we are going to go with plan B, which is to go for a used Mazda crown wheel and pinion. I can no longer get direct from Mazda the ratios that I want, which is why we ended up with an aftermarket one in the first place. So yeah, got a used one on the way now. Fingers crossed that'll solve the problem. So that's gonna, I think Anthony's just been stripping everything apart. Because there was so much metal everywhere in there, he's pulled the entire limited slip differential apart. I think the parts of that are under that cloth there, but stripped all the plates apart, everything, so everything could be meticulously cleaned. And obviously we're going to put new bearings in it because they'll have had a lot of metal going through them. So new bearings are on the way. Good used crown wheel and pinion, and we'll get all that together hopefully early part of next week with a bit of luck. So that's where we're at with that essentially. The only other thing worth mentioning is we had the little seatbelt guides remade, because I talked before about this. I wasn't very happy with the shape of them. They were kind of causing the seatbelt to be quite hard to pull through. So we did a tweak on the design, had them made. I had them on when I went driving on it last week, and they were perfect. So they've now been removed and gone for anodizing. Morris. good news. The diff, you obviously would have seen last week, we were pulling the differential out of it. Crown wheel and pinion was just absolute scrap. And I think Nat's actually planning on sending the crown wheel and pinion away to be hardness tested, because we're pretty certain that the hardening is not up to spec on it, because the wear that it was definitely set up correctly, and the wear that it's incurred is either that the teeth weren't cut quite right or they weren't hardened well enough. But the way it's kind of almost splattering material out the way on the teeth would suggest a hardening problem. Anyway, we've gone with plan B, which is a good used Mazda crown wheel and pinion. Anthony got that in over the last couple of days. We got that in by lunchtime yesterday. It was back on the floor, ready to go. Took it out for a test drive, and winner, all good. In fact, with hindsight now, I realise that the diff was always a bit noisy right from the word go in the previous crown wheel and pinion. It's always difficult to know what's a problem and what's not when you don't know, when you haven't got the benchmark for the noise that's generally transmitted, because sometimes you can get a diff that's perfectly quiet on a car that's really well sound deadened, and then you put it into another car and it sounds more intrusive because there's less sound deadening, or the noise is being transmitted more directly into the body. So it's difficult to know whether it was actually a fault or not. But now I've used the standard Mazda way in there, I now realise that it was noisy from the start. Just got a lot worse very quickly when it was reused. So yeah, winner on that. The owner actually came over yesterday, so I took him out. So I suppose that's a big benchmark, big landmark really. I took him out for a quick passenger ride in it, and I think with that diff issue ticked off, we're kind of on the home straight. As long as nothing else comes about from testing, we've got literally probably only 2 or 3 days of last little details that haven't been put together. I'm just putting the window sort of waste seals on. I've got to put the escutcheons around the door handles. There's just little final things that weren't particularly pressing that might as well be done now. I want to get some more miles on it. I've got to calibrate the speedo, calibrate the tacho, calibrate the fuel gauge, just little details like that. I want to go out and get the laptop on the engine ECU, Alex in the passenger seat, just check in on the mapping, make sure we're happy with that. Yeah, and it's so very much on the countdown to completion on this, which is pretty darned exciting. Morris, so as I mentioned a minute ago, we took this to Mallory Park at the weekend. Went down extremely well, but this also gave me the opportunity to get more miles on it. And yeah, so far so good. I think last week I mentioned we'd just done the differential swap and I'd taken it for a quick nip down the road and it was all looking good. But yeah, doing more miles on it now, still performing well. I just need to get some miles on this and keep getting out in it as much as I can, and then we'll be ready to hand it over, the big handover.
The Morris is back over the pit for a few more checkups, just basically post-shakedown niggles to go through on that, nothing too dramatic, but we're just continuing that, ready for when Carl's back from his holidays next week, he can get back out in that and get some more miles on that. A brief swing by that one.
So Morris, I was going through some PDM programming stuff on it yesterday. The boot release was one thing I was looking at, basically going through a few little niggles that I'd noticed along the way. The boot release wasn't working unless you had the ignition on, from the remote fob that was. So a little bit of a reprogram on the PDM for that, and this is where you start to see the beauty of PDM stuff. I also had to put a diode in. This was probably an oversight on the part of Max, who did the wiring loom. The hazards, the PDM has to be woken up by a signal from the ignition switch so that it doesn't drain the battery when the ignition's off. So the unit basically goes to sleep. Now, because we need the hazards to work when the ignition's not on, we have another feed to the same wake pin, if you like, on the PDM from the hazard switch to put 12 volts to the PDM and wake it up if you have the hazards on. What I don't think Max had factored in was the fact that actually it can backfeed down that wire, and I noticed when the differential, when I had the problem with the diff, I had to pull over, put the hazards on, turn the key off, and the engine carried on running. I was like, oh, what's going on here then? And realised very quickly if you then turn the hazards off, the engine went off, and it was because the wake pin feed from the hazards was actually keeping acting as if the ignition was on. So I put a diode in that just to sort that out. Yeah, so really those last little details just tickling through. I needed to just realign the driver's door frame slightly to get the glass going up a bit more convincingly into its channel at the top. Little details. I'm just checking the seals as well. I wanted to make sure that the seals were definitely contacting all the way around. Tend to use a little trick there of just doing the tiniest smear of something like WD-40 or grease, something that stays on there and doesn't immediately evaporate off, and then shut the door and you can kind of see the imprint of it around. But that all looks good on both doors, so just going through those last little details really on that. So that's where we're at with that. And then Morris, I should have been out in that already this week. Unfortunately, last time I tried to go out in it, we had the wretched power steering problem return, which had been fine for absolutely ages. If you cast your minds back, we had an issue with the pressure relief valve in the steering. It would basically stick open after you'd been revving the engine fairly high. So then when the revs dropped again, you'd have no power assistance because it would just be bleeding off all the pressure. And we decided it must be some kind of small debris in the fluid. And we hadn't put a filter in it, which we often don't, but we put a filter in it, which seemed to sort it for a very long while. However, it did it again the other day, so we've just belt and braces replaced the power steering pump on it, because the only thing we've really got left is that there must be some kind of manufacturing defect in either the plunger in the pressure relief valve or the bore that it runs in, although they look visually okay. So we've replaced the pump, and hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll be ready to go. James has been just doing a spanner check on that since I've last been out on it, just to make sure all the nuts and bolts and everything, all the paint marks that we put on them still line up. And then the Morris and the Land Cruiser. So that's where all of this upbeat stuff has led to the misery of the Morris and the Land Cruiser, which have been really trying my patience a bit. You'll probably have noticed that it seems like they've been dragging on, and we've just been banging our heads against brick walls with really annoying, unforeseen problems. So on the Morris, we had the power steering issue, which we thought we'd resolve. We put a new pump on it. No, I'm just trying to think the sequence of events even now. No, we thought we'd resolved on the original pump by having the filter in there. It did a long while without having problems, and then I had the pressure relief valve stick on it again. So we thought one of the things we knew we'd done was we'd welded a threaded union onto it. So we thought, well, we'll try swapping to a different pump where that hasn't been done, in case the weld distorted the housing of the pump and made the little relief valve, which is basically a piston in a cylinder, maybe that was making the tolerance tight on that. So we changed to another pump, and it very quickly had the same problem, which is that's where you start questioning your sanity, because you think there's two different pumps. What's going on here? You know, it's got to be something we've done, something that's not the pump. But we're going round and round the houses, and the bottom line is that valve is a piston and it's sticking in the cylinder. So we thought, well, these are both reconditioned or aftermarket manufactured pumps. Perhaps learning lessons from previously, we should go with a genuine Ford pump. So we've got which you can't get new anymore. We've got a good used genuine Ford pump. We've now put that on there. We came up with a method of tapping out the inlet, so we didn't have to weld the threaded union on, because we originally wanted to swap to a threaded union on the feed, so it didn't have a pushed-on rubber pipe with a pressed-in spigot quite near the exhaust. Obviously unlikely to come out or come off, but it's still a bit of a risk of getting oil on the exhaust. So we've swapped to that, tapped it, put it back together. It's bled up, working fine. I now need to get more miles on that again, and fingers crossed this time we won't have the same thing. Right, let's wander around this way. And I have to say, after several weeks of seemingly banging our heads against walls with a couple of problems on some of these cars, particularly the Morris and the Land Cruiser, this week has suddenly been the weight lifted, because we've kind of resolved various problems. This one we had repeated problems with the power steering pressure relief valve sticking, and eventually went from using a reproduction aftermarket pump to a used genuine Ford pump, and this is a familiar story with the diff on this as well. And so far I went out in this yesterday, I think I did about 60 miles in it, no problems, to be honest, really happy mechanically, so I'm kind of calling that a mechanical sign off on this. Very shortly this will be going over to my detailing guy, who's going to start sprucing it up ready for the big final handover. So very exciting times. I've got to do the handbook for that as well, write the manual for the car essentially, so I might show you that when that's done. Oh, actually something we've been looking at is wipers. So it's kind of come to a bit of a head because of looking at the wipers on this. So I'm moving briefly to the Morris. James was looking at the windscreen wipers because I wasn't very happy with them, and now we basically bought the appropriate set of Tex wipers that are supplied for this era of Morris. It's got the clap hands wipers, as they call them, where they kind of go out and to the middle rather than both to one side. But I wasn't very happy essentially with how the blade attached to the arm. The arm's just got a hook on the end, which kind of jams into a detail on the blade, but not very convincingly, and it just kind of wobbles around and looks like it'll fly off at the slightest provocation. So we were looking at the other type of Tex wiper arm that's actually got, I think they call it a bayonet fitting, but it's kind of the wiper arm actually clicks into a socket quite positively. And we were thinking it makes much more sense to use those because they do the same length wiper blades with that system, and they can do the wiper arms. Now I believe possibly on the later Morrises they do actually offer that style, but not on the clap hands. And I was thinking, well, the only difference is that one's cranked one way and the other's cranked the other way. And I know that Tex offer right and left hand drive arms for a lot of cars, so it kind of made sense that there just needed to be an arm that was the right length, one cranked to the right, one cranked to the left, 10-degree crank on them, and the appropriate size blade. So we spoke to Tex, who are actually very cooperative, very helpful, and I think in the space of a day or two knocked us up exactly what we wanted. So we now have the bayonet type fitting wiper arms to go on there. Going back to the Morris, I think last week I'd basically signed it off mechanically. We're moving forward to having it detailed, but there was, despite my best efforts, you probably noticed it was encased in masking tape on the back, but despite my best efforts it picked up a couple of stone chips on it during testing. So one on the front wing and then a couple on the rear wings. So we've had them off. Gaz has now repainted all of those. The rear wings I'm leaving off because we're going to do a sprayed PPF on those to avoid any future chips. And then the front wing has gone back on now, and I think over the course of tomorrow we'll be just buttoning up any last bits on this so that on Monday it can go over to Dale at Detail by Dale. He'll spruce it all up inside and out, do the final machine polishing on it, ceramic coat it all, basically make it look amazing, and then once it's back here we'll get the PPF'd rear wings bolted on, and I think that will be ready to go. You will notice the Morris is not here, and the Morris is not here not because it's been handed over, but it has gone to our detailing guy. I don't know why I'm going over here to show you the gap. Look, there's not a car here. But it's gone to Detail by Dale, who is now in the process of basically doing all the final machine polishing, ceramic coating, engine bay, interior, basically sprucing it up to a level which we'd struggle to do in the environment that we've got. I hope one day, maybe in another premises, we might be able to have our own detailing bay, but as it is, we haven't really got a suitable environment for it, so he's doing that. We took it down there with the rear wings removed. You probably remember that I'd mentioned last week that we'd picked up a couple of stone chips on it during testing, despite my best efforts to encase it in masking tape. We also got one on the front wing, so we took off one front wing, both rears, repainted those, but we've left the rears off because we're going to do a sprayable PPF on those. I was kind of umming and ahhing on which route to go, and I had somebody say they could do normal, film type PPF on the rear wings, but a couple of, my usual detail and a couple of others said it would be the angles would be too great, and I was very concerned about a lot of stretching and moving and trying, and the possibility of damaging the paint. So we've decided to go with a sprayable PPF, which we're going to do, and then we'll get the wings back on when it's back here, and then it will be ready to go. So I think also it's probably going to be a couple of weeks and that'll be going as well. So that's pretty much where we're at for this week. So look what's going on in here. So lurking under here is the Morris, which is back from detailing. I shall probably get some video footage of this for next week, but for the minute we're trying to keep it covered as much as we possibly can, just so we don't ruin Dale's hard work on it. Suffice to say, it does look absolutely stunning. We sent it over there without the rear wings on. He's basically detailed everything inside and out. He kind of revisited the lack of finish, because with it being quite a long while now since we painted it, it just gone a little, it settled a little bit, gone a little bit dull. So went back over it with just wet sanding it with, I think, 3000 grit on a DA. Polished it all up, ceramic coated everything, everything inside, engine bay. And in the meantime, we've done our own sprayed PPF. Now, on the subject of that, somebody's asked whether I knew someone who could offer that. We will be able to offer that, so watch this space on that. I will do some announcements on that fairly soon, but we've done a sprayed PPF on the rear wings, which has come out really good. But I'll go into that a bit more in a separate video. So yeah, well, this is essentially just kind of waiting for collection. I think I'm going to write the owner's manual for it. I think there might be a couple of other tiny little details, but that's looking good to go. Thank you very much, Nathaniel. And as that montage probably suggested, the first order of events is the fact that the Morris is sitting over there, about to be handed over. However, more importantly than that, right here, we have a vending machine, kindly supplied by Roundstone Coffee. So now it's Roundstone, Monster, Red Bull. I mean, Scott is literally going to drink all of these monsters in the first week and just be bouncing off the walls. However, this is something that's been on the cards for a while. We had a system previously which was kind of an honesty box, snack box system. It turns out there's not much honesty in this place because the honesty box was basically me and Nat buying everybody else's snacks. Right, yes, Morris, owner of this, is literally going to be here in a couple of hours' time, and then I think loading it up, ready to head back home tomorrow. So yeah, very excited. It's always nerve-wracking doing the final handover, but I must admit now it's all cleaned up. It's looking pretty spectacular. So that is that.